So our last panel is one that we are, of course, very well steeped in because you've heard about issues about gas-electric harmonization all day in one capacity or another, starting with Jim, through the RTO panel, and through some of the other things that will be needed as we deal with ensuring reliability as we go forward. But this is our final stop on today's Competitive Power Summit journey, so we appreciate you staying with us. And I want to highlight the fact that these issues, like many of the other issues that we've talked about, are not unique to regions of the country that are restructured regions. I've said this at least once before today. This is an issue that's common across the entire footprint, whether you're a vertically integrated utility or whether you are a restructured independent power producer in a restructured market around the country. As we've seen the experience in winter storms over the last 2 or 3 years, it has happened virtually everywhere. In fact, the worst outcomes, unfortunately, were in vertically integrated portions of the country and restructured portions of the country. At least in Elliott, we're able to supply power to those people who needed it. So we're happy to talk about a number of issues. I'm sure Daniel has a laundry list of questions that will be hopefully helpful in enlightening both where we are and some of the challenges that exist. We've tried to bring together the entire value chain. I'll let Daniel do the introductions, but Daniel was kind enough to say he would try to tackle this very challenging issue, and I will, spoiler alert, tell you there's no silver bullet. I say this every time we get together. There's not even silver buckshot, I don't think, but we are committed to trying to figure out how we can actually solve the problem. As I think all of the panels have said, admiration of the problem is we've been doing that for far too long. We need to do more to try and work on solutions. So Daniel, with that, I will turn it over to you and take it from there.
Thanks so much, Todd. Yeah, what a way to close out another EPSA Competitive Energy Summit by talking about this issue. I'm Daniel Moore. I cover energy policy at Bloomberg. I focus on regulatory issues at the Energy Department and FERC. So this issue has been coming up over and over again. So I'm really excited to have this panel. And we have people from across the natural gas supply chain and value chain all the way up to Todd. I asked them to sit in order, the order that the gas flows, ending with Todd. So I'll introduce them. We have at the far end, Dustin Meyer, Senior Vice President of Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs for the American Petroleum Institute. Next to Dustin, we have Dena Wiggins, President and CEO of the Natural Gas Supply Association. Next to Dena, Amy Andryszak, President and CEO of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. And finally, last but not least, everyone
is tired of hearing from me.
Todd Snitchler, EPSA President and CEO. So I want to start by doing some table setting because this is an issue that we've heard a lot about, but it can be very complex, and there's a lot of different moving pieces and parts to this. So I was hoping you could all introduce yourselves and talk about your members first and foremost, and how the companies and members that you represent play into this gas-electric coordination issue. And maybe we can start with Dustin on the end.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and great to be with everybody today. So most folks probably know API, but we represent the entirety of the U.S. oil and gas value chain. We have over 600 members ranging everywhere from the producing side, midstream side, refining, LNG exporters, everything in between. I think for the purposes of this conversation, it probably focused mostly on the upstream, on the production side. You guys all know that the United States is by far the world's largest producer of natural gas. It's really not even close. We're running about 103 billion cubic feet per day. The second largest in the world is Russia, which is just south of about 60 billion cubic feet per day. So this has had an enormous advantage for the United States over the last couple of decades, and something that we want to continue. Obviously, the role of natural gas in the power sector has been a topic of conversation throughout the day. We're over 43% of electricity generation now, primarily driven by the increased availability and thus lower cost of natural gas. So a lot of important trends here that impact this conversation. It seems to us that it's really only going in one direction, which is to say that we need more supply and we need more of it at an affordable price. So happy to be here and cover more of that as we move on.
Okay. Yeah. Dena?
Hi, thank you. I'm with the Natural Gas Supply Association, and we represent domestic producer marketers. And as Dustin said, we've got an abundant supply here in the United States. We're really blessed with an enormous resource base. We have been producing natural gas this winter at or near record levels. Today, the estimate of our production is about 101 BCF today. And just the knowledge that we have that kind of energy source, I think is something that we need to keep in mind as we continue to grapple with all these issues. I was at, some of my colleagues up here were last week at CERAWeek and had the occasion to sit on in a conversation with the head of the Nigerian Petroleum Council, a corporation I think is the exact name, and he was talking about the problems of energy availability in sub-Saharan Africa. They're not focused, as he said, and they can't focus on reliability because they're focused on availability. And we are so fortunate that we have this resource here, and we have lots of things we can work on together, including this huge topic of reliability, but we do have the availability, not only of natural gas, but of crude oil, we have nuclear, we have solar, we have wind, we have a lot of resources that we can call on to power this country. And we just have to continue to grapple with these reliability issues to make sure we get it right, to make sure we deliver energy in an affordable and reliable way. And I think that is really the task at hand for all of us.
Great. Amy Andryszak with INGAA, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Todd. So my members are interstate natural gas pipeline operators. So we represent long-haul transmission pipelines. So you're thinking the large diameter pipelines that move gas in areas around the country where it's produced to areas where it's going to be consumed by end users. And we have 4 main types of end users, or our main customers. We have gas local distribution companies, industrial manufacturing, LNG export facilities, and then electricity generators. So those are our 4 main kind of buckets of customers. And to the question of why is this an important conversation, as has been mentioned throughout the day, we have seen just the expansive growth of the use of gas for electricity generation. I was trying to find some retrospective numbers, and in 2000, gas represented about 16% of electricity generation, and as has been noted, we're up to 43% today. And I think we've heard a lot today, and we certainly heard a lot last week at CERAWeek about how that demand is continuing to grow. And we know that there are other sources, there's going to be more renewables that are going to come on as part of the solution to meet that demand. But I think we have to think of it as the entire demand pie is going to continue to grow. So even though we're going to have more sources, additional sources, I don't think we're going to see the amount of gas decreasing anytime in the foreseeable future. So this is a very important conversation for us all to be having.
And we are one of the 4 largest customers on Amy's system. And so EPSA represents about 150,000 megawatts of generation, still of all types. So that includes some coal, although the number is dropping. A substantial amount of our members' assets are natural gas fired, but a growing amount of our members' assets are battery storage, renewables. We even have some hydro. So we cover the waterfront. But probably 60 to 65% of our members' portfolio represent natural gas, and they're located in all the restructured markets around the country. And as Tom mentioned, there's even some development that's going on in non-restructured parts of the country for reasons that he mentioned this morning. So we look at this as a critically important issue because, of course, as Amy notes, the rising amount of natural gas and I'm not a huge fan of the term baseload, but for dispatchable generation that is required to keep the lights on. Natural gas used to be the marginal unit that it was nice to have and you needed it when the system really called on it. Now it is absolutely critical in order for us to keep the lights on, really both in normal operating circumstances, but even more so in critical weather periods, which is really what drove us to have the conversation that Amy and Dena and I, and API to some degree, also joined that conversation in order to say we recognize that there is reputational risk to the energy system, and our reliability concerns have become the gas industry's reliability concerns. Now, we've got different views on how we maybe want to tackle some of those issues, and we've tried to find the common areas where our Venn diagrams overlap and there is commonality, things that we can support as an industry group more broadly, but also identify where the areas are that we think really need prompt attention. Because as Jim Robb mentioned and the RTO CEOs mentioned this morning, this is a mission critical item for all of them. We view it very similar in that we can't afford to have that proverbial third strike. We don't want the lights to go out. We don't want to have there be a problem with regard to electric generation. And we want to try and be ahead of the curve and not behind the curve again, where we find ourselves having to scramble as a result of another poor outcome that's a result of supply issues or delivery issues or generation not being able to perform. We want to be ahead of that issue, and that's why we think that it's important for us to focus on gas-electric coordination at a number of different levels that I know Daniel's going to get into, but I am just very appreciative of my colleagues' willingness to engage. We started this conversation, Daniel, I apologize if I'm getting ahead of you, but we started this conversation back a year ago, January, before NASB even got started, in an effort to say we recognize that there is an issue and the industry has got to be involved in finding solutions. How do we find those areas of commonality? What are some of the things we have to put in the parking lot because we're not going to agree? Let's not focus on those. Let's focus on the things that we can agree on. And then let's get our technical experts in the room, not just the trade association talking heads. I enjoy my colleagues' company very much, but we don't know the nitty-gritty detail that our members and their teams do. And so putting those folks in the room and asking them to navigate through some pretty difficult issues and conversations is what led, we think, to a first pass at some potential solutions, some issue spotting, and some things that we think require greater discussion and attention. And I'm sure we're going to talk about those as we go forward.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I mean, there has been certainly a degree of frustration that when winter storms come, that there are outages over and over again. This has been an issue for 11, 12 years, probably more than that. And so I'm kind of curious if you could dive into some of those solutions that you all have sat down and talked about. I think as part of the Reliability Alliance, the three of you presented some solutions to FERC last fall. I think there were 11 of them focused on real-time market challenges and then gas infrastructure challenges as well. So can you kind of dive into where the common ground may be, what could actually move the needle on this issue that has been talked about for such a long time?
You guys want to start?
Dena, do you want to start?
I'll start. Well, I think Todd is fond of saying, and he said today, there's no silver bullet. And I agree with that. I think we all are in agreement that there's no silver bullet. I think that what we're trying to come up with was a series of recommendations that we believe will move the needle, that we will hope will move the needle, that we think we can find common ground on to work towards implementing some of these things that will move the needle. But we have to try. We've been working on gas-electric coordination for quite a number of years now. We did this in the 2014 timeframe. We did some things with the gas day. That was what the focus was on the effort at that time. We were successful in getting some changes that I think the industry supported, the value chain, all the market participants supported. I think since then, our thinking has evolved, our experience with winter storms has evolved. I think every winter storm that we've experienced has also served as a learning opportunity for everybody in the industry. And we've taken things away from that to try to improve our operation and our performance the next time. I think that will continue, but just a couple of things that I think are worth noting is that a lot of what we're talking about today could be solved with infrastructure. And I know there's been a theme today on infrastructure, but if Amy's members were able, I know they're willing, but if Amy's members were willing to put more pipe in the ground, then there'd be more capacity available when Todd's members get called on for at the last minute to run. But we do need to solve the infrastructure issue. And it's not only for gas pipelines, but transmission lines. We just need more infrastructure. So I think that's one critical piece that we all need to come together to work on. And the other thing, which I'll leave somebody else to talk about, I think there do need to be some market design changes on the power side so that generators are not called on at the last minute or at midnight when that ability to run doesn't match with the timelines on the gas day. And there's a mismatch there that we somehow need to figure out how to incentivize and have the generators get paid for, compensated for, making decisions in advance, making fuel decisions and purchases in advance, and being able to run when they're needed, and getting paid for it. I have to say that many times, because if I don't say that, then Todd will pick up one of these water bottles and throw it at me.
Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about the gas infrastructure issue? I mean, it is such a big deal, but permitting and siting of gas pipelines, as we've heard today and outside of this room, is exceedingly difficult. So how do you think through that challenge? And if there isn't, if it isn't feasible to build more gas pipelines, how do you think about the gas reliability issue?
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly, challenges with continuing to build infrastructure is front and center for my members. And there is an interest in building more pipeline infrastructure. I mean, I realize it's a challenge. It's become increasingly difficult. The timelines have become longer. It's become more expensive. But we understand that there's going to be increased demand, and that means there's going to be more demand for natural gas. We've already covered that there's plenty of gas to be produced in the United States, but we need that infrastructure to move it out of production areas. Now, my members are looking at other options. You can do some things like adding more compression, and there are other things you can do on the pipeline system that help increase capacity. But in certain areas of the country, we're already really reaching capacity constraints, particularly in the Northeast, for example. And so we're going to need more infrastructure over time to ensure that reliability. One of the things that's talked about quite a bit, and it got touched on, I think, earlier today, you're asking how we think about it, is you hear, well, over time, there'll be less daily throughput of gas. You'll have less molecules moving through the system on a daily basis. And my members concede that. I think the timeline for when that may happen, people have a difference of perspective on how quickly that'll happen, but I think we would be willing to concede that over time. However, you are going to see, we believe you will see, particularly as you bring more intermittent sources onto the grid, you're going to see more peak periods. And to meet those peak periods, you're going to need the capacity in the pipeline system. If it doesn't exist, then you can't flow enough gas through to meet those needs during peak periods. And that's a real concern that we have looking at the overall longevity of the system and how we think it's going to evolve over time.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
There's a lot of this conversation that we're all having that is things that need to be fixed. But I also think it's worth keeping in mind that there are many, many, many days during the year when it all works. Right. And of course, we're focusing on the times when it doesn't work, because that's just what we do. Those are the critical periods. That's when it's tight. That's when we're worried that something really bad is going to happen. But I do think it's worth keeping in mind that we're talking right now, we're talking 5-10 days of the year when there's a problem. Now, that might change over time. It doesn't mean we walk away from continuing to talk about these issues, but I think that's something we need to focus on as well.
Well, and if I can just touch on that, because Todd, Dena, and I have done a version of this presentation together a number of times, and Todd always says it's a 5 to 15 day a year problem, and I always say, well, that's what it is now, but we think these peak periods are going to change and we're going to need more of them. But I want to just make a point, something that I heard earlier today it was kind of touched on but not fully mentioned. We keep talking about this increase in demand from data centers and AI. And I think it's important for us all to note that that's actually going to be base load demand. So I think most of us in this room understand that we aren't anywhere close to renewable sources meeting that type of base load demand. I think that's another example of a driver for long-term natural gas. And that's different than these just peak periods that I was talking about that I do think are going to be more than a 5-10 day a year issue. I think we're going to see more of that as we move to more just general electrification and more renewable sources for our electricity.
Todd, Dena mentioned some market challenges. Could you talk a little bit about from, if I'm a electric generating station, I'm relying on gas, I'm relying on that showing up, what are some of the vulnerabilities there that could happen? I mean, most of the time it works, but like what are you planning for and what are the challenges there?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, right? It's the what do we do when there's a storm coming? We know that there's something that's likely to happen. What is the expectation of the RTO, if they're going to call me to run, if they're not going to call me to run? When are they going to make me aware? And what is my exposure if I have to go procure a commodity on the chance that I may run? It seems to us that there's a pretty straightforward way for us to look at this. There's been a couple of occasions where a gas generator went and bought gas and then was told, yeah, we didn't run you, and so you've got to eat the cost. That doesn't seem like that's a very good model. So I think we need to be a little more thoughtful about how we ensure that the resources that are necessary to ensure reliability can use a market-based mechanism in order to go procure the commodity that's needed so that in the event that they are called, that they can run. In the event that they are not needed, then if the outcome is they have to disgorge whatever profit they could have made. My members tell me, look, just because we can doesn't mean we're in the business of gas arbitrage. We make our money by running our gas plants, and we want to make sure that we can do that. And we don't want to find ourselves upside down when we're going to pay enormous penalties because we can't perform, because we can't procure the commodity. So if we have better signals and the ability to recover the cost for those dollars that have to be spent, that's a step in the right direction. I think secondly, the RTOs can make that a shall, not a may, which would give greater certainty to market participants that they can go procure that gas. And if you want to build the collar around it to ensure that they don't profit unnecessarily, I think we could live with some version of whatever that looks like. But I think that actually probably needs to happen and could happen in fairly short order. I think the other issue you run into is how is the RTO dispatching and planning for the weather event that's likely to happen? These always seem to happen over 3- and 4-day weekends. It's always a cold weather event. I mean, the odds are astronomical, but it's been that case for the last several major events. I think if you look at scheduling early, conservative operations, making sure that you have sufficient resources that can actually get the commodity that needs to run, back to Amy's point about the pipeline capacity, the commodity actually being delivered from the production field into the system, are all parts of the value chain that have to hit at the same time. And it's been clear that we have not batted 1,000 across the value chain on doing that, and that's really the customer's expectation that we do. Because everybody remembers Winter Storm Elliott, you remember the name, you know what happened, and all the things that went with it. 2 weeks later, there was a very similar weather event, and you don't know anything about it because the RTO operated on a more conservative basis, got resources queued up and ready to go. They knew that they ought to go procure gas. They'd be in a position to run it. I'm not saying that it was perfect. There are members that probably lost money procuring the commodity. That comes back to the first point that I made. But you don't know anything about that because the system operator did a better job of navigating through the issue. And so forecasting has to be more accurate. Running with conservative operations would be far more helpful. Addressing the cost recovery concerns and the ability for market participants to bid in their costs and not be over mitigated are all things that would be helpful in ensuring that the right amount of resources with the right capability to procure the commodity needed to run the facility and can have that commodity delivered on a timely basis. All of those things would be incremental steps towards solving the problem. Because as we've said it before, we'll probably say it again a dozen times before we're done, because there isn't one silver bullet, these little incremental things have accretive value as you stack them one on top of the other. And that's where we're trying to find the areas of commonality, because if you have a number of things that can be layered one on top of the other and the other, that has tremendous duplicative benefits that I think improve the performance of the system, ensure that generators have the commodity they need, ensure that it can be delivered on a timely basis, can be procured from the supplier, and the E&P producers can put it into the system.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add something to that? You were asking sort of, one of your earlier questions was like, this issue's not new, right? Like this is not a new issue. And as Dena noted, there's been some incremental changes over time. We added a cycle to the gas day. There's been some changes in terms of communication between the pipelines and RTOs. There was a FERC order addressing that in 2013. There have been some incremental changes, but what we knew has been a problem and has not been changed is what Todd just described. Like, we've known that we've needed some market reforms. They have not. That's an area that hasn't really improved and continues to be a problem.
Yeah, we had some RTO chiefs on stage a little bit earlier today, and there was some suggestion that they need more insight into what's going on into the gas market, into the gas system, and that it's like they don't have all of the information. And it was, and I've heard that from others as well, that there needs to be more transparency coming from the gas system. And I'm just curious what you think about that. I mean, this kind of goes along with the suggestion that there needs to be some kind of NERC for gas or gas reliability organization. I'm curious kind of, and maybe we can start with Dena on this as well. Like, what do you think about having more kind of regulatory oversight or a regulatory body for the gas system to ensure reliability?
Can I cut in line only to say, before Dena answers, and I know she will, I had a conversation with our friends at the RTOs as we were planning for this session, and to be clear, they read our Reliability Alliance paper as critical of the RTOs and that we dump all this at their feet and that they could just solve all this if they would just get their act together. And that's not what the Reliability Alliance paper says. There are things that can be done at the RTO level. There are things that can be done across our value chain. So lest anyone think, then I don't know if Rich is still here, but lest anyone think that we are pointing our finger exclusively and saying, if you all would just get your act together, the world will be perfect. That is not what we were suggesting in our paper. And so I just want to be clear that folks understand that, because I was surprised at the pushback in our planning call, but I appreciated it because it allows us to then have a more fulsome conversation around the issues. So I just want to make sure we're all clear on that. So Dena, I apologize for cutting in front of you.
No, and I'll say ditto to that. I mean, I think that is worth underscoring, that was not in any way the intention of what we put together there. But back to the question that Daniel was asking, this probably is not a big surprise. You've probably heard me and others in this part of the value chain say this before. We're a little skeptical of the need for a gas reliability organization. We're not quite sure what that would entail. I mean, the concept gets thrown out a lot. There, to my knowledge, is not anything that details what that would look like, what it would do, what its responsibilities would be. I do think that it's also worth noting that, at least in my view, that would take federal legislation. And I don't think that there's the wherewithal to get that across the finish line right now. So I think that our efforts would be better served, as we sit here today, with trying to figure out what we can do on a voluntary basis, or what we can do to tackle some of these issues. And they might not be low-hanging fruit. I don't mean to say that every recommendation that we put forward in that paper would be easy to accomplish, but I think a lot of them would be a lot more easily accomplished than putting a GRO in place. So as I said, we're skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Dustin,
I mean,
probably have some views on that.
we completely agree, and it just seems as if there's, often a desire to, solve problems with more regulatory oversight. I think this is not a regulatory oversight solution. This is an infrastructure problem, and it needs an infrastructure solution. And I think that really needs to be the focus. And it seems to me that even if something like this did come together and they made a list of recommendations, well, what would be at the top of that list of recommendations? We probably need a lot more gas infrastructure, and we already know that today. That's really the challenge.
Can I add a couple thoughts on that? So agree with my colleagues, and just want to highlight kind of two things. One, I mean, one of the areas that keeps coming up in terms of a potential need for GRO is around winterization and what are different segments of the value chain doing around winterization. I mean, it's something that my members are looking at. We already have a one-pager. You can find it on our website about a lot of the things that we already do on winterization. And as an organization, we're looking at putting forward some more voluntary commitments on that front. But we also feel that from the interstate natural gas pipeline perspective, we are heavily regulated by FERC already. And FERC has the authority to ask us a lot more questions already about what we're doing in terms of winterization on our system. So we would argue that FERC could use that authority before we need an additional GRO. And then similarly, and I realize this is going to sound somewhat counter to Todd's comments, and I don't mean for it to, but FERC also has authority over the RTO ISO tariffs. And so FERC could exercise more authority in terms of looking at those tariffs and how they factor in reliability. And I mean, this whole discussion is happening because of reliability and wanting to ensure that we're all reliable. And so I would argue that, maybe there could be more done there as well before we stand up a new reliability regulator.
And in that regard, if I can just pick up on that, one of the statistics, and I might not get the exact number correct, but it's a small handful of states, I think it's maybe 6 or 7, that have 80% of the production in the United States. So putting in some big federal program to deal with a fairly small number of states, again, I'm skeptical of that. Yeah, in Texas, on the heels of Winter Storm Uri, put together this voluntary framework that Texas has used. I think that's been working well, and I think all of our member companies have taken steps on the heels of the winter storms to improve their winterization. There's been a narrative that I find distressing that our member companies didn't winterize at all. And that's not true. I think some of those winter storms certainly overwhelmed the winterization efforts that had been put in place, and our members have learned lessons from what was done and perhaps not done, and taken steps to improve winterization. But to say that there wasn't any is just not right.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up winterization because, as I've covered winter storms and my colleagues cover winter storms, I'm always trying to figure out where is the breakdown, like why does this happen? And winterization comes up a lot, and in the context of having more standards, winterization is always thrown out there. But you're saying, winterization has happened, your members do winterize, but it's just kind of the extremity of the storms, it's the cold weather, it overwhelmed what you have done historically, but you are making progress to step that up going forward. Right,
and I think the solution is not a one-size-fits-all. It's regional, it's by state, even within a large state, it could be different in one part of the state than another. So again, that gets into my skepticism that there could be some overall national standard that would really solve the problem we're trying to solve. I think there are better ways to go about it.
Yeah, one of the more controversial suggestions out of the NASB report last year was looking at force majeure language and revising that to encourage winterization. And I think there was a report from a few RTOs in February that also suggested that, and even suggested maybe reviewing force majeure language when it's invoked to ensure that there was proper winterization measures in place. And so there are calls for this in terms of using looking at force majeure a little bit more closely. Obviously I don't think that you support that, but I'm curious, what you think about that idea, and are there other measures? Is the existing force majeure language enough? And if so, why? When it comes to winterizing your system, and when you declare force majeure, you actually have done everything you can to winterize. How do you think about that suggestion from some of these reports?
I think that using some sort of force majeure change to get at winterization is probably not the best approach. And obviously, if you're talking about changing something that's sort of fundamental to our industry, which is the force majeure provision in the you're most assuredly going to run into significant questions. And I think it's also worth noting that this base NASB contract that gets bandied about a lot is not the monolithic creature that it is portrayed to be. Yes, there is a base NASB contract. These contracts are entered into between and among sophisticated market participants. There are ways, and have been ways forever, I think, since the contract was first put into place, to modify that contract by negotiations. And it's done all the time. I'm not talking about just on force majeure, but it is modified by special provisions. The confirms are modified. Those are negotiated by sophisticated parties with sophisticated outside counsel. So it's not just like something that if I wanted to sell my car to Dustin, I'd go online and print out a contract and we would sign that. It's already a lot more complicated than that. And again, it's sophisticated market participants who have the ability to engage in negotiations to modify it. So I think we need to sort of keep that in mind when we're talking about the NASB contract.
All I will add is those on the receiving end of force majeure calls, the less we have to deal with force majeure, the better it would be for system performance. So I take no strong opinion on language or specifics because Dena's right about that's negotiated by sophisticated parties. But I will say that as those who, when their force majeure is called and we don't have supply, that creates an immediate problem for a generating unit that needs to run.
We do have a question from the audience, but I wanted to first clarify, you're talking about the market changes you'd like to see and some of the things that you all agree on. What's the timeline for getting those changes into place? Like, is this something that can happen by the next winter or the next few winters? So we're talking about, you know, extreme weather and things that can blow in any given week. So what are you thinking in terms of timeline for getting those done?
Well, I think a handful of them could be done in fairly short order, like before next winter. Some of the longer term issues like permitting and siting, it'd be great if we could get people to compromise and agree. That doesn't seem like it's on the horizon, so that's a longer term problem. But I think some of the issues about cost recovery and how the RTO is going to dispatch and schedule, I think those things can be addressed in fairly short order. And if that requires an intermediate step to get from where we are to someplace better to a final outcome that would be kind of the gold standard or, you know, whatever you want to call it at the end, I think incremental progress moving towards a more reliable system is the direction everybody wants to go.
And I also think that when we started these conversations that led to our recommendations, we realized that we were not the entire industry sitting there talking about this, that we needed to come together as our group and then broaden the tent, broaden the conversation to include other participants, other market players. And for the last however many months now, 4, 5? Mm-hmm. How deep into this are we? For the last several months, that's what we've been doing, is going out and meeting with others and explaining to other people and other organizations and other parts of the industry what we've done, why we've done it, and what we think it would take to implement some of these suggestions. So it's a process.
The question I have here is gas production at the wellhead is at will supply. What are the options to mitigate that risk aside from winterization? For example, getting drilling crews to the site may be impossible in an ice storm. So
what was the first part of the question? It's
at will.
Yeah.
At will supply.
Yeah, I mean, the industry has long proven pretty adept at operating in very extreme operating environments. I think that if you look at, especially going back to Winter Storm Uri, you know, the amount of time that had gone since a similar storm had been experienced, especially in the heavily producing western part of the state, had been a while. I mean, I think gas production in West Texas had probably doubled since the last time a weather event like that had come to pass. So I think that there were a lot of lessons learned. I mean, a reminder that sometimes on the upstream side of the business, those shutoffs aren't just incidental. I mean, they're done for safety reasons. But I think the big change culturally, in addition to spurring a lot of emphasis on the need for winterization, for what it's worth, API is also a standard-setting organization, and we have some recommended practices for the industry specifically on winterization. But I think the level of communication between other market participants, including the grid operator, has really improved demonstrably. That was a big part of the issue for Uri. I think most folks would agree. And being able to know more in advance that the need to send crews out there is going to happen, I think gives a little bit more buffer to the whole system.
Do any of you have anything to add on that? Or? I know you're down the chain, but
no, not on that. I just I was chuckling because one of the things that we learned from the pipeline perspective following Winter Storm Elliott, we as all of us did in our own ways, we're trying to figure out exactly what happened and lessons learned, and we went and we met with our different customer bases to sort of get a better understanding. And one of the things we kept hearing is, well, we need more warning if you think a storm's coming. And many of my members said, well, we were sending you warnings like a week in advance, week and a half in advance, long before the Weather Channel was sending warnings. We were sending you warnings that a storm was coming and it was going to be really bad and there could be operational issues. And what we kept hearing was, yeah, we didn't really believe that. You send so many notices. We aren't sure which ones to believe. Well, I mean, like that's kind of not the pipeline operator's problem. But
You
it
could
is,
say, and I really mean it.
right? I mean, that was kind of like, no, you need to tell us if it's like really real this time. And so, but all joking aside, it has been part of the ongoing discussion about improving communications. Are there different communications products that are needed, sort of ways to not only indicate sort of early warnings, but in the case if we're seeing potential for supply issues, because I think one of the things that was very well covered in the FERC-NERC report on Elliott was that it was primarily a supply shortage event. And so as the transporter post-storm, we felt very squeezed in the middle of, sort of what happened. You weren't delivering. Well, we can only deliver gas that's delivered to us. We don't own the gas. We don't procure the gas. We transport the gas. But there were a lot of questions about what did you know? What could you communicate? And that was a big part of kind of after action, us talking with our customers about different communications vehicles. But I was just to get back to where I was, you need to believe the warnings. So.
And I think it also highlights the regionality of some of the issues. If you have an exceptionally cold occurrence in the mid-Atlantic states, that's going to affect Utica and Marcellus production. It may not affect the Southwest or Texas production. Or if you have a Winter Storm Uri situation where the cold dips all the way to Houston and it's below zero for an extended period of time, and that happens to cover half the country, then you're going to have a problem that's going to be across the entire system. So I think you have to, this is again, it gets back to that there's no one perfect way to solve it, because you may have one storm that affects a small portion of the country and another storm that could affect broad swaths of the country, that even if you wanted to turn up the volume and the production, you simply couldn't do it. And it varies based on the weather conditions that you experience. And so that's a bit of the belt and suspenders, as I like to say, the Department of Redundancy department. Sometimes you have to have as much as you can possibly have in order for us to make sure that we can get from here through the reliability event. And that's that all of the above message that I think has come through pretty clearly over the course of the whole day, is that we can't only rely on just this one piece here or this one item there or this one technology. We need to be prepared to adopt and put into practice those technologies that are available, that are commercially viable, that are profitable, and actually help us meet and achieve these reliability obligations that we take very seriously, as do the rest of the folks on this panel.
And I meant to ask this at the outset because we're a week into spring, so we've made it through a winter without a major, thankfully, and obviously the cold weather blasts are not over. But what you talk about lessons learned. What did we learn from this winter going forward? And was it just, did we make it through because we had mild weather, or were there things that you all proactively learned from previous winters and took upon yourself to put into effect that that allowed us to get through this past winter? And Dustin, do you want to?
I mean, the January stretch, it's easy to forget it now, which for what it's worth, my sister lives in Wisconsin and sent me a text message right before I came up here, and it is snowing quite heavily up there right now, so winter's not over in all parts of the country. But the January stretch was really, really bad and pretty widespread, and we got through that without a whole lot of incident. I think that is a reminder. I mean, now you can just feel it not only within the industry, but even within the media as well, that 5 days out of an event like this, the conversation starts as to, are we going to get through it? It's easy to forget just what a massive pull this is on the gas system when you have an acute weather event like this that impacts not only producing basin in Texas, but also in the Marcellus, and the huge gas fleet throughout Texas and the huge gas fleet in PJM. It's just a remarkable pull on the system, but I do think we got a lot better at it this time around, and I still just think a big part of it is, one, the industry has made, across the value chain, has made some investments on the winterization front, but I think the communication part is very real.
Anybody else?
I would echo, I think, winterization, communication, and I will say a lesson learned from the pipeline industry. We work very hard to make the system work for our customers. And so we know a winter storm is coming. We do line pack. If we have available storage, we have it available. And we do our best to be able to kind of be flexible and work with our customers. And what happens during key peak periods is that if there is too much pull on the system, it exhausts those kind of mechanisms. And that's then what causes pressurization issues. One of the things we've learned is to start warning our customers earlier, hey, you need to stay within your contractual obligations of your tariff. We think we've, in some respects, been sort of a victim of our own success, of our ability to be flexible and make it work for our customers. But what we have found is we can't do that for too long, because then if you really do have supply shortages, then there's just no other gas to sort of backfill, and that's when you have too much strain on the system, and the system becomes out of balance, and that's when you have pressurization issues.
Got it.
And I think it's safe to say our members took, sorry,
No,
Dustin.
go ahead, Ted.
Our members took pretty significant steps in order to evaluate their fleet, look at performance based on the issues that were demonstrated during Winter Storm Elliott, in an effort to say we're not going to have that happen again, if at all possible. You also have the experience, and this was sort of an eye-opener, that as new resources come on, you have to go through that first winter to see, where is the wind blowing from? Do we have the shielding in the right spot in order to keep the temperature straight? Like, you have to go through the experience of a winter to know how your new facility is going to perform and operate. And once you do that, you apply those lessons, and you find yourself in a better spot the second year, and on and on and on. But I think our members were very diligent at trying to address the things that they could to be proactive in response to it, because, again, the reputational risk of another serious outage is simply too great for us to not pay significant attention to. And I think the other issue that, Jim mentioned when we talked this morning is they're going to kind of do a little less deep, but they're going to do an evaluation of this past winter to see, did we just get lucky? Was the improvement as a result of the work that was done through the entire value chain? Was it the temperature didn't drop and stay as cold? Was it actually substantially similar and we actually can show improved performance? Or was this just, we got by with one? Getting by is not an acceptable threshold for us to aim for. So I think that data will be useful, but we certainly need to have some data upon which we can then say we need to do more. We've done the things that need to be done. Are there further things that we should look at? Are there things that collaboratively we should be doing that will help, again, make those incremental steps forward? But certainly our sector has understood the importance of not having a big number of megawatts say, sorry, I'm just not available because something broke that I should have paid attention to. We recognize and accept that that's not acceptable, and we've taken steps to try and address those things proactively.
And I can tell you the emails were flying around fast and furious before that weather event. I mean, not only among the people up here on the stage, but I think we were all reaching out to our members saying, what are you hearing? What's it look like? What are you doing? And what I was getting back was a lot of proaction of reaching out to customers, trying to help customers get ready. And I think that's a lesson learned from the past that we will continue acting on in the future.
Because you just think of how much it's changed and what we all know to look for. How far south is it going to go? How far east is it going to go? How long is it going to last? Is
How
there going to be
fast?
precipitation? That's a huge differentiator, right? We all just know to speak that language now. It's a big change.
Yeah, this question speaks to that regionality that you're touching on. And the question says, NERC began as again, referencing NERC, but NERC began as a voluntary organization to standardize safety and reliability on the power side with regionality acknowledged. Is the gas industry discussing some approach to address its concerns?
I feel like we kind of addressed that already in your question about whether or not we think there needs to be a GRO. I mean, I think we are looking at communications and winterization and some of these
thinking
things.
about the regionality of that. And looking at, again, post-Elliott, and you guys touched on this a little bit, but want to see if you have anything else to add. Have producers and pipelines taken measures that would prevent another near crisis like the Elliott impact on the Con Ed gas supply? Is that response data available?
That's a good question if the response data is available. I mean, it kind of goes to Todd's point earlier that now that we've been through this year, through a January episode that, really did stress the system, but we got through it. Looking through as to what were the drivers of that success, how much of a role did, say, winterization on the upstream side make a difference? I haven't seen that data, but that would be very valuable to have.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either.
I mean, you can see the data on the actual production side. Obviously, the production wasn't impacted nearly as much as what it was during Elliott, during this January. So that suggests that something was, something was enhanced. But.
This question gets to the fact that the stage is only so big and we can't have 15 more chairs. But having worked together on a set of incremental solutions, how does the panel believe that the conversation will evolve when you include more stakeholders, LDCs, states, ISOs, et cetera? Obviously, we mentioned at the start of this is a complicated issue, involves a lot of pieces and parts. So how do you've come up with some, suggestions as the Reliability Alliance. So how do you anticipate that evolving going forward?
Invite us back next year.
At a bigger stage.
So Dena is clearly the optimist in the room. I'm a little bit I'm hopeful that everyone that is involved in the discussion has the same sense of urgency around the desire to get it right. All of us are similarly situated with reputational risk of failure to perform, and we all stand to benefit from improving the performance of the system, whether you're an LDC, whether you're a vertically integrated utility, whether you're public power, whether you're small producers or larger producers, whether you're the pipes or you're the marketers or you're generators like we are. I think it'll be a new set of voices that will be expressing many of the same issues. The issues are pretty clear. The solution set may get a little more complicated because everybody's got their vested interest and someone's ox is inevitably going to be gored. But I think in the end, if you really care about trying to solve the problem, we're going to have to all give a little, and that's going to vary depending on where you are, and everyone's going to feel like they're being put upon. But at some point, we all are going to have to try to find that collaborative solution. It's kind of like, I'm a lawyer by training. And so people say, well, I didn't draft a will and I know I need to do that. I'm like, oh no, even if you haven't, you have one. The state legislature wrote it for you. You don't want that, but it's available. We're similarly situated in that I don't know that I trust the current crop of members of Congress to write a solution that would be good for industry, that would be good for consumers, and that would actually solve the problem. I think an industry-driven discussion that would actually seek to address the granular issues that need to be addressed stands a much greater chance of long-term success than hoping that the drafters of legislation who have not demonstrated much desire to draft anything of the sort lately, other than, things that I'll save my political commentary. I trust industry to recommend a set of solutions that are durable and sustainable, as opposed to asking people who are not technical experts to try and do so in a politically charged environment.
I do think at the one, if we did hypothetically expand this conversation, one aspect that has changed is, beyond some of the more targeted and narrow fixes, that overarching impetus and need to build more infrastructure. I think if we had had that expanded conversation a couple of years ago, there would have been a lot of voices that said, well, we don't need any new gas infrastructure. That's the last thing we need to be investing in. I think, and we've heard it so much today, reflecting on just the reality of growing demand going forward, I think that there are going to be fewer of those voices and a broader recognition that we are going to have to invest in gas infrastructure of all sorts.
And I think we're going to hear that from more voices.
Exactly.
Not just those of up here, of us up here on the stage.
Yeah.
Right? I think there, in other conferences I've attended recently, there just seems to be more of a growing recognition that this is not something that just the gas industry cares about.
Yeah, we always believe this to be
Right,
true. Now
right.
there's a lot of other voices who are kind of recognizing it.
Well, and I'll just add to that. I think we are starting to hear more voices recognizing it. I would like to hear more of those voices be actually louder. I mean, I don't know if any of our RTO friends are still in the audience, but we believe that the RTOs could play a greater role in talking about proactively the need for more infrastructure to address reliability. And we would like to see that. We think there's certainly more room for that. The other thing I would just add, talking about expanding the conversation, we all started this talking about gas electric reliability, but one thing that we're very mindful of as the pipeline industry is that those gas LDCs, those are also 40% of our customer base. So we are balancing those interests as well, and certainly we all have an interest in being reliable and serving our customers, but there are different end uses that we're very mindful of also.
And that's the same thing is true for us. The power sector is a very important part of our market. It's not all of our market. So sometimes when we have these conversations, some of the feedback we get is, well, you're not suggesting to do anything really on your side of the ledger, on the gas side. But whatever we are talking about doing, we have to be mindful that it has to work for all of our customers, our important power customers and our important other customers who we have to serve as well and want to serve.
Well, we're entering the final 90 seconds. I do have one more question from the audience that may be one for the cocktail hour. We can hear the glasses clinking. Again, back into the weeds. What are the obstacles to breaking up the weekend? Monday gas package into a daily nomination to increase
pour the
liquidity.
glasses of wine.
Right, that's great cocktail conversation. But anything briefly you can offer on that, since that is one of the big problems here.
Well, I don't know how to do this quickly. Let me just say one thing, that it works now because it has worked before for the customers that we have. I think this is something that's been driven by, in part by the market demand from the LDCs, and having more cycles, having more availability to nominate gas doesn't solve a liquidity problem when it's really cold. Yeah. We need infrastructure for that.
Great.
As you might imagine, this was an issue that was discussed at length and at volume at some of our initial conversations, as we had to kind of get out of our systems but I know this. And it actually turns out we knew part of it, but we didn't know all of it. And our colleagues down the row knew some of it, but they didn't know all of our industry as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've reached détente on this issue to some degree. But I do think that there are products and services that have been offered, and as we see the performance demands of the system changing, we may need to revisit what some of those services are, how they can be procured and contracted for, so long as we can recover the cost of that is vitally important, at the risk of sounding too simplistic. You can design me the greatest tool in the toolbox, but if I can't recover for what it costs me to utilize it, it doesn't do anybody any good. So we have to be mindful of that, because to come back to the thing that I think drives a lot of this conversation, all of this is great, but it has to be affordable. And affordable varies by customer. If you're my 80-year-old mother, it's one number. If you're Bill Gates, it's another number. But we have to keep the customer in mind, because in the end, the markets allow us the best opportunity to mitigate those costs. And that's why we lean into that as EPSA, and that's what our members do. They're friendly competitors, but they're competitors. And in the end, we think that's the best way for us to achieve the objectives, but the market rules have to allow it. The system has to be able to deliver it, and we have to be in a position to procure it. And I think everybody across the stage would agree that we all want to achieve that same outcome. There'll be some bumps between here and the finish line, but I know that's where we're all trying to get to, which makes the time spent working through thorny issues worth it.
Great. Well, that was a great way to end the panel.
Yeah, right.
Join me in thanking the panel.